How's it going, Randak?
Most excellent. I'm here again. How could it not be?
Yeah, this is a good time. This is always a good time. I was thinking maybe we could take some examples of some interesting situations you've created or participated in your role-playing games that you've hosted and stuff. And kind of dive into what made them interesting and how you might be able to either learn lessons or even kind of replicate it, you know?
So when you say situations, are you talking about situations of the world building nature, or situations for that intrigue the players to explore more? Or so we got to kind of, I would narrow in on that, um, so we can kind of be clear in our message, if you will.
In my mind, I think of the meme, I shoot magic missile into the darkness whenever I think of role-playing games. So
Oh,
stuff like that, I guess.
yeah. Well, I mean, a role-playing game itself, is communal storytelling.
Yeah.
Right? So, if we can play a war game where we put counters on the board or miniatures on the table, and we have a set of rules, and I do this and I've got 2-to-1 odds and I roll on the table, and certainly there's a little bit of maybe role playing or at least story building in our mind, and that, we're reliving the French Revolution, or, World War II in the Pacific, or whatever we're living. Um, but at the end of the day, that's still just a war game. So to me, a role playing game is specifically designed to be a communal storytelling experience, which once again, I'm convinced we've been telling stories for as long as we could communicate with each other. And the rules are just there to kind of facilitate that. The world building, if you will, is there to facilitate that. And even the game master is there. And I think a lot of game masters get confused on this, in my experience, of the game master sometimes thinks they're there to tell a story. And in my opinion, and everything I say is always my opinion, the game master is not the one there to tell the story. The game master is the one there to set the environment, adjudicate the rules. Kind of, you can certainly put some plot hooks out there. I mean, there's things you do to encourage the story, like we talked about, with not putting a bunch of writers in a writer's room and then walking in and saying, boys and girls write a story and walking out, but you give them that environment and those hooks and those non-player characters, and here's a local lord and here's some gods, or whatever your world is going to be. And then that allows the players to riff off that. And my finding is that players you don't even think of as super creative, or they don't even think of themselves as super creative, do a great job. Like if you give them the leeway, I think it's just embedded in our DNA of that we are just natural storytellers. So people who don't think they're very good at it usually are pretty good at it if given the right environment.
That's amazing. I think that's such an amazing thing to be able to recreate manually, as a game master. I was just watching my friend play Final Fantasy 16, and it's an amazing game, crazy action, cool story, cool characters, graphics are insane, but it doesn't have really any of that. And I did notice that it did feel more like an advanced version of Pong or something, or
Yes.
where
Yeah.
you're just kind of like moving, dodging, it didn't have any of that quality you're talking about. And I would love to kind of define that quality and give it a name or something so I can come back to it easily. What would you call that?
I would call it agency,
Agency? You
right?
said
Because
communal storytelling too,
communal
so
storytelling, I think communal storytelling is the bottom line of it. But
mm,
the difference is, and I think I mentioned this in one of our previous talks, if I watch a movie or read a book, I have no agency.
right.
Right? The director, the creator, the writer has prepared a story for me that's hopefully entertaining or thought provoking. Once we've talked about that intent, what is the spine of their story? But I know I'm not making any decisions or taking any actions that affect that world. So to me, we want to understand what we're creating. Am I creating a story for players or readers or viewers to consume, or am I creating an experience, which in a role-playing games case is usually a communal storytelling experience, and then that should have agency, because if none of my actions matter, then did I go left or right? Well, it didn't really matter, so I just picked one randomly, and there was no stakes involved. There was no like, oh, I don't know which one to do. Do I go left and I give up this? Do I go right and I give up that? And I don't want to give up either of those things. So this is what creates that tension. Like for instance, we talked about in your game, of being more aspirational, of this is an exploration, this is maybe exploration on the human psyche and exploring the wider universe, but we still want there to be some sort of decision making of why did I choose planet A versus planet B, as opposed to, yeah, I just flipped a coin and picked one and it didn't really matter. Because when your player says it didn't really matter, that's not agency. That's just a random number generator, and that gets boring after a while.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm struggling with that right now in my game. How do you kind of do you think about that when you're creating your stories and your environments? Like, how do you give agency in these decision trees?
Yeah, well, and that's the big question. So here I come back again to questions. What because you don't want to give someone total agency, and I don't want to get up in your game every morning and decide what I'm having for breakfast, right? Because that's not a decision either. So what is the nature of my game? What is the theme of my game, right? That spine of the game. What's the like? For instance, we've talked about if your game is exploration, a lot of my agency should be around maybe exploration as opposed to some other kind of player versus player combat or so okay, what do I do to encourage and create an environment and create the game mechanics and create the world building elements? What do I do that allows the player to make those decisions, and then how do I make sure once again they matter, as opposed to, yeah, you get to pick whether you go planet A or B. Okay, that doesn't matter. Well, what am I giving up to go to planet A versus what am I giving up to planet B? Or you could flip that. What am I getting going to planet A versus getting to planet B? Same thing. One's a pessimist, I guess, and one's an optimist. But this is where we want to do things deliberately, like anything else in life. We could throw a bunch of world building out there, we could throw a bunch of mechanics out there, but if they're not done with an intent of mind of driving towards our target audience, that's when you get a mess. That's when you get a completely non-functional game, or you get, say you're good at pulling those elements together anyway, you may get a mediocre experience because it just doesn't all fit together. It's all, hey, this was cool, and this was cool, and this was cool, and this was cool, but when I navigate this world, all those elements are cool, but it just doesn't sit right. And a lot of times the player, reader, viewer won't necessarily think about that consciously. It just, once again, something happens and, oh, I'm distracted. Now I go watch television or go start reading a book, because the brain it's constantly pulling you out of immersion. And so rather than getting stuck in the story and you look up 3 hours later and go, oh my God, that's stupid, I got to go to work tomorrow, and I've just been up for 3 hours engaged in this. Um, that's the, as much as I hate to say that's what we want to create, we don't necessarily want to ruin people's lives, but we do want to create that experience where people get totally immersed in the game. And what would immerse you? Once again, there's nothing wrong with watching a great movie. I like a great movie. I like a great book. It's a very crafted experience. And the fact of the matter is that a great game, which that's not a storytelling game, but a great game, movie, or book is generally going to be a crisper version of storytelling, because you have one vision, highly polished. You've gone through, and as opposed to communal storytelling where you throw something in and I throw something in and we're riffing off. So it's not the same experience, but they're different experiences to me. I love that the best writers, the best directors making that, but I also love, hey, this story isn't going to be as great, but it isn't going to be someone else's story. It's going to be our story that we've put together. And at the end of the day, that's really cool. And really, to me, I guess that's probably a more satisfying experience, because I spend more time creating games and running games than I do watching TV and stuff. So, I think I've chosen the form of the destroyer, if you will. And to me, it's having that communal experience.
Om Namah Shivaya.
That's,
Yeah. So if you if you think about the mechanic that people are kind of how would you measure how engaged someone is? Like in a movie, people get really engaged. They can get lost in that world. I mean, it's hypnotic, but they don't have any agency. In a game where you have like a lot of agency, it can be boring and you don't get engaged with it as much. So the agency isn't necessarily what drives, like, I guess you would say, like losing yourself or identification. You identify with the characters in a movie and you feel like you're there. You identify with the characters in a game, and I guess you feel like you're there. Is that kind of the measurement of?
in a way, because one of the things you're talking about would be, do you, for instance, let's take watching a movie for a minute to keep it simple. You're watching a movie. Once again, you have no agency. but do you feel empathy or at least understanding for the characters, even the antagonist? So if you have an antagonist who's a cardboard two-dimensional villain, they just want to destroy everything, there's no rhyme or reason to it, you don't really understand them. Right. So, it's hard to feel empathy sometimes for the antagonist if he wants to destroy the world, but you can at least say, okay, do I understand that antagonist or not? And let's say that antagonist believes that there's a horrible wrong and it's going to kill, 50% of humanity. I'm going to do this great evil, but then only 10% of humanity dies. You may not agree with the decision they made. You may say we should fight, and if it costs us 50%, it costs us 50%. But at least you understand that antagonist. You say, I understand where they're going from, and then we relate back. Once again, hopefully we haven't had a decision about how much of humanity we destroy. But we take that back to our own decisions of I had to make a decision of where I was going to hurt person A or person B, and I really struggled with that because do I do nothing and maybe hurt them both? Do I choose one and what's the format? So we relate to those characters, and that relatability allows us to drive along. So one of the things that happens in a place where you've said, okay, Randy, you go out and you can tell this story, and we're going to tell this story together. Here's your agency, but do those decisions matter, right? Do I feel that angst, if you will, that conflict, or that I'm making choices, and those choices have consequences in the world. And if I take A, I give up B, and if I take C, I give up D, and I don't want to give up either of those, and I want to take both of those. And what's the choice? And if it's a false choice, I'm going to get to have A and B. And some stories do that, and they end up, to me, they're very boring stories. The protagonist got everything they wanted for no cost. You know, okay, I don't find that very satisfying. Because once again, we don't relate that in life. Human beings are set up to believe that there's a cost to everything. We have a lot of mythologies around there's a cost. You make a wish with the genie, the genie's gonna put a cost in there. You make a you make a pact with a superior force, whether that's a god or ancient creature or whatever. There's a cost to that. Human beings are wired, and not even just human beings. There's other animals are wired to believe that there should be a cost to everything. I love that part of the Matrix for as much as it has some pretty deep character building flaws. Spoiler here if you haven't seen the Matrix, but when basically I think it's Neo who says, why don't you just why are you putting us in this world with all these problems, right? The machines have put us into this world where we struggle, and basically the computer says, the machine says, we did that. We gave you paradise and you couldn't handle it. You didn't believe it. And so I think that's one of the great truths of that movie. Human beings are just not wired that way, and maybe thousands of years from now we will. Although in the last many thousands of years we haven't changed our wiring really, so I wouldn't count on it, but who knows?
Yeah, side quest here. I think there's something to be said for play, for games. Like the people who have that urge to go out and fight and destroy and be aggressive, they can go play football or soccer or something, Like if we could just redirect it, maybe. What do you think of that idea? Sublimate it.
Well, so what I mean, what do we do when we play a game? There's people who want to be a hero, right? Who hasn't, it'd be great to be a hero and do some amazing thing that benefited humanity. And I can go play a computer game where I am the hero. So I want to, I get done with a hard day at work, and maybe I'm in a job where people come at me all day. I'm in a customer service job, and I have to take it with a smile all day long. And then I come home and I play a first person shooter, and I'm taking some agency back in my life in a way, right? Because we talked about before as well, the human brain doesn't know that you're in a simulation, right? The human brain sees you're trying to, shoot these other guys, and so, this is a way for me to let out some frustration. And some people do that watching TV, right? So there's different formats, but this is the thing, and I think this is what attracts. There's people who come home from work and they have a high pressure job, so they want to play some cozy game, or I'm going to just maybe an expert. Hey, I'm just going to explore. And there's some cool things, and there's no, no player's going to jump out and attack me, and no monster's going to jump out and attack me. So I'm getting the experience I want. So this gets into that game design thing again of what's the experience that we want the player to have, and because that's our target market, and that's who we're going to seek out. If I don't want to come home from work and be totally stressed out, I'm not going to play a first person shooter game. I'm not going to play a war game, right? Those just aren't going to appeal to me. But there's people who that will appeal to.
What kind of games do you play?
Yeah, I don't play very many anymore,
Me
honestly.
either.
Well, I do. The games I find myself mostly playing are community members, like indie games, because AAA games. The problem I have with AAA games, like most other, institutions in the Western world in particular, um, everything's sanitized. You know exactly what you're going to get. It's very sanitized. It's not really cutting edge, so it's not very exciting. So I'd rather play an indie game, someone who's poured their heart and soul into something, and yeah, maybe the graphics aren't great or even aren't there, but it makes sense. But I do like all kinds of games, and this is one of my. So if you're trying to grab my attention as a game designer, I love 4X games, which is why I'm making Chaos Empire, right? But I do like first-person shooters, but my reflexes aren't what they used to be, and my hands are bad, so that's not as fun. I like puzzle games, so to me, I like really good games would be the answer because I think it's the same thing as a book experience. Like I tend to have genres I read. Like I like science fiction and fantasy, but a great book is a great book. So to me, if someone comes up and says, "Look, I know this book isn't something you usually read, but it's phenomenal. The writing's phenomenal, but also the story's phenomenal." Like that's where I even like to go, well, I'm going to do that. First of all, it breaks me out of my normal patterns of like, okay, I read a sci-fi, and then I read a fantasy, and then I read a science book maybe, and then I'm going to read something completely outside of my normal genre and get a different experience. But also as a creator, I'll be able to look at the specific story beats of that genre, which I don't usually do, and how they navigate it, and maybe we don't steal, right, as creatives, but we borrow, like, and we borrow those ideas and we move it into our creative process.
Yeah, interesting. And what are you reading now? Curious.
What am I reading? I was reading something last night. What was I reading? I'm reading actually a graphic novel series, and I
Huh.
won't remember the name off the top of my head. I'm on volume 9 of it, so it's very extensive. But maybe it'll pop in like we did with the with the Babylon 5. But yeah, so it's really to me, what's got my attention in the moment and just consume it. Is it good? If it's good, I'll continue to read it. If it's not, I hopefully don't pick it up. I try to be very selective because we have a very limited amount of time. And so for me personally, I'd rather spend most of my free time at this point making my games. Right? That's just
Yeah.
it gives me pleasure to make those games. It's a fun process, you know. So I can be playing games, for example, or I can be making games. And for some people, they need that balance. Some people just want to play them. But for me, I'm very very guarded on my time. I'm very deliberate would probably be a better way to put it. I'm looking at it and saying, I have X number of discretionary hours a week. What am I going to do with that? And then let's make sure that we don't, hey, I've had a hard part for my game, so I'm going to sit down in front of the television and click through channels, which I never do, but click through channels for the next few hours because I'm not sure what I'm going to do. If I found myself doing whatever equivalent that would be with me, I'd go, okay, I'm now just wasting time, right? I'm conflict avoiding of something. What's on my list of things that I can do? And then I'll look at those and say, well, I may not have the energy for something. I have some complicated coding to do next. I just don't have the energy to do that. I have this thing over here, which is kind of a longer term. I'm going to need 4 hours. I don't think I have 4 hours. Hey, here's the thing I can do that just takes an hour. And so let's just do that, get it off my list. It moves me an hour forward in my goals and what I want to accomplish. And then I'm just not sitting there spinning my wheels, wasting time to waste time.
Yeah, do you feel like you build up attention if you are consistently, working where you just need like a big relaxation session? Or no, or you just kind of push
It's
it, push it,
yeah,
push
it's not really my personality, so I'm lucky in that way, right?
it? Hmm.
But I also think just from doing this for so long, I've learned how to switch task appropriately. So when I'm burning out on one thing, that I'm switching to something else, which uses a different part of my brain. So coding is a perfect example of that. Coding takes a lot of mental energy from me. I don't know how to do it. I'm not very good at it. It's a lot of flailing around, being frustrated. But there's an intriguing aspect to it, and you can get locked into it because I kind of get that, the dog with a bone that won't let go. Like I'm gonna fix this. I'm trying to make this work, and it's not working, and I'm so close. And the next thing you know, like 2.5 hours have passed, which is really bad. I'm trying to even not do that. Then you stop your timer because I'm timing these things, and I'm like, oh, that was 2.5 hours. I should not sit here, and my eyes are going different directions, and so, but okay. I'm done with that. There's no way I can leap back into that, right? Like that, like, so what can I do? Okay, I can do some writing, which is much easier, and it has its own difficulties because what I write is junk, right? It starts out as puking against the wall, and you got to fix it. But at least I don't have to spend a bunch of time, using AI or Googling or whatever, trying to figure out what word I need to use here. You write the thing and you come back and fix it later. So I like that thought of making progress, and I do. It's not like I'm always doing some task driving me forward to this business objective, because at the end of the day, I don't see a difference between business life and personal life. But I spend time with friends, right? I ran my role playing game yesterday, so I have my once a month game. I've got some other, so I'm doing those things. I'm just very measured in what I'm doing and why. But I'm not the kind of person, like, I don't want to go sit on a beach and just lay there for 3 days. Like, I hear people talk about that, and I think that's great, and I understand why there's people who would enjoy that and need that. But that to me would be hell. Like, it would just be like for a couple hours, that'd probably be great, and I'd be like, okay, there's so many things I could be doing, and this has gotten boring now, so let me go do those things. So
Yeah, I'm similar. I'm like in between you and the beach people. My wife's a beach person. So she kind of
don't
balances.
say your wife is a beach, because if she watches this, we'll both be in trouble. So
She's right here. She's listening.
yeah. Yeah, but I think
Yeah.
that's part about knowing yourself, right? Because I could come to you and say, "Oh, Danny, like, what do you mean you spent 3 hours relaxing this week? That's 3 hours you could have done something. You need to do this. You need to do that, right?" You get into that mode, and you may say, like, "I needed those 3 hours," and for some people, maybe those 3 hours is where, oh, I just got this brilliant idea of how to get through this code block I have, right? Like, I wasn't able to solve it, or hey, I just had this amazing world building idea. So I do think we need to give our brain space to think. So it's the method that we do that, right? So how do we give our brain space? Because your brain does work on things. And even for instance, for my writing, like the novel I'm writing right now, I spent a year outlining that. And and it wasn't like I sat down every day and outlined it. I kind of, I wrote the theme, I kind of wrote some things, you throw, like, here's kind of what I think it'll do. Then you go off and you do other tasks, and then something will pop into your brain. You'll come back and you go, ooh, and then you put that in. And in fact, what I find, and I've done this even with Chaos Empire as a game, you wake up and literally, like, you'll wake up at 2 in the morning and go, oh my God, this is such a great idea. I got to write it down. I got to write it down. And then you write it down, you go in to put it in your master document. You're like, oh yeah, I already had this idea, right? Like, I already have this idea. And that's when I find, like, okay, I'm circling around now. I'm coming back. My brain is kicking out the same ideas that I already have on paper. It's time to do something about this and start to actually execute.
Interesting. Yeah, it's happened to me a couple times, but yeah, not very often.
That's
So
But that's where,
if we
how do you create that space, right? Like, how do you create that
right.
space for yourself to navigate of, okay, I have goals I want to accomplish. And I do think part of that is having a process, because if you say I'm waiting for the muse to strike, for example, like, I want to write some things down, and oh great muse, come to me and give me the answer, that's probably not going to happen. But so we want to give the muse something to work with, right? We're getting back to the blank page thing. Like, okay, don't tell the muse, here's a blank page, give me inspiration. You tell the muse, I've got these things in my brain, and if they stay there, there may not be room for other things. Most of you have higher, hard drives than I do, bigger hard drives. But for me, it's like, okay, this is filling space. So that's where, to me, I have a document that says, here's my story ideas. Here's, or here's the outline of the current story I'm working on, and the novel I'm working on. As I start to write those down, that takes it out of the main part of the brain. So it's like, okay, I'm not having to keep that in my brain anymore. That's now down in a document. Now other ideas can come in. And in fact, when I go and I read that document, that can trigger ideas. And there is, and this is scientifically proven, the act of writing something down, is much different than just keeping in your brain, right? You're going to retain it much better. To me, it's about understanding the pieces underneath. It's sort of like with programming. There's things I could just repeat back to you. You could say, Randy, what's the definition of this? What's a function? What's this? I could repeat that back to you, but underneath it, do I really understand it? Right. And that's the difference to me between someone who really, hey, I could pass a test probably on, as a junior coder, I could probably pass a basic definition test. But can I connect up all the pieces underneath and really have understanding what's going on? I wouldn't want to have to pass that test. So it becomes the same thing. You give your brain that space to start saying, here's the framework we're operating on. Now what's between those lines, and then the subconscious will work on that. Like this comes down to the question thing. Like I've listed my 20 questions for my, my magic system or my universe or whatever, and now my brain is working on that and suddenly kicks in, hey, you answered question 7 and question 12 this way, but what if with question 12 we did this? Oh, let me go in and explore that. So you're helping yourself. You're priming the pump, if you will, on yourself, and your own creativity. And I do think a lot of people get in this mode of, once again, great muse come in and deliver, like some kind of tooth fairy or something, deliver these goodies that, if and there's some people it happens to, and congratulations, you're very lucky. I'm not that way. I don't think most people are. And I think we can get locked in that trap of, well, so and so just like, Danny just wakes up in the middle of the night and writes down 10 good ideas. I can never be Danny, so I might as well quit. No, I'm not Danny, so like I've got to come up with a system that encourages me, and I don't need 10 good ideas. I'd really like one. So how can I get that one good idea?
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you feel like creativity is somehow inherent in us and it just needs to be given space to come out? Or do you feel like it really is just kind of taking pieces of the past and combining them in new ways? I guess. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do, and I think it's both. Honestly, I do. I think that when we first started communicating, that stories were how, and stories to this day is very powerful. We told stories to teach the morals of our tribe, right? To teach the culture of our tribe, to teach the information. When you grab the sharp rock and you hit it with the other sharp rock, here's the story of how Grog hit the sharp rock that made a good sharp rock, versus Thag, who makes horrible rocks. And here's the story of Thag, and and he's dead because he cuts himself on his rocks. So we've been telling stories forever, and so like any evolutionary process, I do think that we are inherent storytellers. I think it's literally in our DNA, that because it's just how we've done things. But that doesn't mean that you say, well, clearly my DNA isn't strong enough, right? My genes for it aren't strong, whatever, however you want to say that, because it can be brought out, right? We can have a tendency, like you could be a natural sprinter, but not be a fast sprinter because you don't have the endurance and you've never trained and you don't know the techniques, as opposed to, hey, I'm going to get a coach, I'm going to get in shape, I'm going to do all these things and really take that fast twitch sprint muscle and maximize the benefit. So this is the good news for us. I think that we all have that creativity in us, but then I think we can put a process on top of it. And I do think that I've seen some people talk about this where, we don't really have the ideas, the universe has them, and the ideas passing by us, and if we're receptive to it, we'll get it. That's a little woo woo for some people, but to me, it doesn't matter. I do think there's lots of good ideas floating around out there, because human themes are universal, right? We have the same problems we had since we became a species, right? We've put a better wrapper on it, right? Lower poverty rates, less, we don't die at, 20 something anymore, generally. But we still have that Maslow's hierarchy, if you will, right? We still need food and shelter and sex and, and then as you move up that scale, so that hasn't changed a bit. So there's constantly ideas, and I think one of the things we do as creatives is, okay, someone's told the story of how to be honest, or why be a good person, or what. Okay, but how am I going to tell that? What's my look on that? And in fact, there's only one person who can tell the story your way, and that's you, which is one of the cool things about it. So, and I think this becomes the creative thing as well, and this is where kind of some study, like some people have a natural ability to understand this, but others say, okay, I want to make this familiar enough so that the user, if you will, understands it easily. They don't have to spend all this cognitive load trying to figure it out or being confused, but different enough to still surprise them. So like, oh yes, once again, we've talked about in science fiction, there's certain beats we expect. There's certain things that should happen in a science fiction story. There's certain things that happen in a romance story. There's certain things that happen in an action story. Yeah, there better be action in an action story. And know, so those are the things we expect. But then, oh, when this action story, instead of racing through the city in cars, what if we have a bus that we can't slow down, right? That was a movie, right? Like the bus can't slow down under, right? Remember the speed limit, okay, is that silly? Absolutely. Is it ridiculous? But action movies tend to be ridiculous. But it was a new take on it, and it's like, okay, that's different than seeing a car race through the city. So maybe I'll go watch that.
I would love to kind of talk more about the identification. Please, that was a weird thunder. I would love to talk more about identification, and because I feel like there's something measurable there. Like the amount someone identifies with something in the game, whether it be a character or your ship or a planet, maybe a species. Do you have you noticed that people kind of have more fun if they're identifying, or at least more engaged in the game if they're
Yeah,
identifying?
absolutely, absolutely, and I think that comes down to, with sentient creatures or even some kind of living entity, you want that empathy. Once again, you want to, you don't necessarily want to or have to, but it's helpful. Like, I understand where this, hey, the species is trying to annihilate us, but I understand why, right? Like, so at least rather than they're unremittingly evil, and there's plenty of media that does that, but like, yeah, we have to destroy them because it's them or us. But I feel for that makes it more right. And once again, this can be a different, like, hey, this is just a first person shooter kind of game. We're going to annihilate them or they're going to annihilate us. We're not supposed to build any pathos, right? We're just supposed to do it, and that's the nature of the game. But if you're trying to make a nuanced story, so that's more of a war game to me, right? You're playing StarCraft. It's Protoss versus Zerg versus Terran. You pick one. Who cares which one you pick unless you happen to have a favorite, and you're just trying to destroy anyone else that's out there. But to make compelling stories, we want to have that feeling, and we want to identify. And let's say that, for your game, let's say that the players are identifying with the ships. Well, a ship is not a person, but a ship is a set of characteristics, and are those characteristics interested in some way, right? If a ship is just this box that flies around in space, well, that's not very interesting. I'm not going to fall in love with a box. I may. I'm weird, but so what about that spaceship grounds the player in that, right? Like what attracts them to that? And I do think part of that gets into that world building that we've talked about. Is, do all the pieces fit together? Is this interesting in some way? Is the way the ship navigates the universe interesting in some way? What happens to the ship? Can we improve it? Do we get better at navigating in it? Do we so we connect to those objects? And we've talked about this because even in my Chaos Empire game, which once again is a war game with very minimal story building, I find that players start to make up stories about even mechanics of how mechanics work, because that means they're engaged in the universe. And they say, oh, when you do this, this thing happens. And I'm like, I wrote this code, and I'm not a very good coder, but I know that's not how it works. But then you go, well, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe it does work that way, right? So you go and you test it, and you go, no, it works the way I thought it worked. But I like that when players start making up those stories, and you'll tell them. And this is the funny part: you'll go into it and you'll go, "Hey, Danny, look, I checked it when you said that. I've reviewed it. I tested it. It doesn't work that way." And you go, "Yeah, yeah, 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 it does." I'm like, "All right, but I've done my due diligence as the creator and told you it doesn't. And as long as you're having fun with it, why ruin your fun?"
Yeah, interesting. And do you feel like people identify with characters more than ships and fleets and stuff? Is that a big difference?
Oh, it's closer, right? The farther away you get, a lot of science fiction, even if there's no humans involved, is, and some would argue most science, if not all science fiction, is supposed to be about humans, right? Not that humans have to be in it, but we're talking about, an AI controlled universe where there's no organic material left. It's still about humans. It's still giving us a message about humans. So I think we just have more touch points of understanding or empathy than we do with, like, once again, here's a box. Okay, it's a box. What's interesting about a box? So I mean, one of the talking about the ship example, well, if the ship has an AI, what does that do? Right? We can anthropomorphize. That was a good pronunciation of that word. That ship, and we're not necessarily thinking of it as just a metal container, right, or a ceramic container, or whatever it's supposed to be, that's hauling us around. It has a personality. It talks to us. Maybe and then we start making game design decisions or story. Does it talk back to us? Right? Does it have an agenda that, hey, the ship realizes that this is a classic AI story. The AI realizes that the best way to protect humans is to take away all their weapons and their freedom, right? And then keep us, safe. So what is that doing? That's feeding into our fears, our very human fears of having our agency removed, right? Like the Frankenstein monster. We have created the Frankenstein monster who grew so powerful that it took away our agency. So we're relating to the machine not because of it's a machine, or the AI because it's an AI. We're relating to it because of how it reflects back our humanity.
Yeah, interesting. Would you say kind of the ideal game would be the one that reflects back our humanity the most? Even the good
I
and
would
bad
say,
aspects?
Yeah. I would say there is no ideal game because there's a purpose to a game, and if you're trying to build a first-person shooter that you just go out there and have fun with your buddies, it's that you don't need to be reflecting humanity at all, right? So
Never.
so I think this is where the intent comes in of understanding kind of that spine of your story or your game. What are we trying to show here? But I definitely think, like if you go out and take a, basically do a masterclass study, you go out and look at the best games, right? And once again, there are some that have none of that. It's the first person, once again, like a StarCraft. StarCraft. Hey, we're just trying to kill everything, right?
Counter Strike.
RTS
Yeah.
game, try to kill everything. But if you're really, that's not a thought-provoking game. That's just a fun game. How many actions can I do per minute? What's my build order? I build the bunker, and then I build the supply depot, then I build. But at the end of the day, if we're really trying to push the envelope of storytelling, if we're really trying to push the consumer of what we're creating and make them think, yeah, what is it reflecting about us? What is and it can't be the thing, do I pick to be a good person versus a bad person? Because that's not a real choice, right? Like you may even say, well, I'm going to pick a bad person, this run through the game and just like be a bad person. But at the end of the day, I think those tougher choices are, once again, you get into the situation, it's the trolley problem. Like, if I do nothing, these people die. But if I take action, a lot fewer people die, but they're different people than would have died. And what's the right answer? Because the fact is, there's not a right answer. There's an answer based on your experience and your beliefs. Um, so those are, to me, those are the ones that become memorable because you get done with that, and then later you're thinking, man, like I pulled the lever of the trolley and it killed less people, but man, I still feel about those, especially if you set it up like in a story context, you know who those people are, right? It's not just like here, hey, because numbers are numbers, but here's little Billy lying on the track. Are you going to pull this lever and kill little Billy who's 8 years old and has his whole life in front of him? And he loves robots, and you're like, oh my God, I'm killing, and so what are you doing? You're empathizing with that character. Like, I understand little Billy. I either was little Billy or my son was little Billy or I knew little Billy, and so those are the things that really stick with you, and you'll be thinking about them, and what a great thing as a creator. If when people are done with your game, your book, whatever, if people keep thinking about it and thinking about what you put them through, hopefully not in a, oh, they put me through hell and I'll never read that person again. But you like, man, that was what an ending. Like that was just amazing how that set up, and oh, it was so, even if it was sad. Like I've played some really sad games, and at the end you just keep thinking about it. Was it Paper Moon? About mental health. And you're finding these little origami. I'm probably saying the wrong thing, but there's these little origami rabbits, I think, or something like that throughout, or bunnies, rabbits or bunnies. But you're going through this and you're trying to figure out what those are. And it's just a really sad game. But I didn't get done with it and go, oh, that was horrible. Like I'm really, I didn't want to play that because it made me sad. Like it made me think about a real thing that happens. Mental health is a very important thing, and not having that is such horrible. So even if you don't have those issues yourself, think about, this is a great example. Like you may not have mental issues yourself, mental health issues, but you probably know people who do,
Oh, I
right?
do.
And even if you didn't, yeah, you certainly understand it, right? Like what happens if I started to lose my mind in some way and I saw things that weren't there, or I suffered severe depression and there was, it wasn't because of my life or anything I could do. It was just, it was chemical or whatever combination of factors. So that's a horrible situation. And how is this being navigated, and making you think about that, and maybe even seeing the grace in it of someone navigate that to the best they can, and that's going to haunt you in a way, and once again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And there's people who don't want that gaming experience and they're not going to play that game. They shouldn't, right? Like I can't play a game like that because it's just going to, it's going to send me into some kind of spiral, and I don't need to be there. But for those who would enjoy that, enjoy is a bad term, but for those who would benefit from that game, as a consumption of media, what a great experience to come through, and even think about that from, okay, maybe I have a little better understanding of what it's like to have a crisis like that, right? And to be in that situation, because I know, and here's where stories do come in. Like I've read the scientific definition, say depression. I've read the scientific definition of deep depression. I certainly, yeah, it makes sense. I could regurgitate it on a test, but to sit in there through a story and experience it through the eyes of, say, the protagonist who's going through that situation. And you're going to understand it at a more visceral level because we understand stories. Those scientific facts are cool, but at the end of the day, here's the story that, yeah, there's the statistics that say how many millions of people. Here's the story of one individual who impacted me more than those statistics ever did.
This is such a fascinating part of art and media is that, and actually, I'm going to take a little digression here. One of the things you said is something I was talking to a friend about recently, where when I watched The Matrix and Neo was reading the code in 1999, and he was able to like see things in the code, or tank or something was, um, I thought coding would be like that. I thought one day I'd be able to read code and it would just be like speaking a language or seeing images. That has yet to happen after 20 years. Maybe it's just
Right,
me,
right. But you're still
but
hopeful.
no, I think it's just a different beast. I think that the reason you can't do that is because it's not like a story where the words you read are the words you say in your head, and that naturally has an effortless result. With code, the words you read are nothing like what's actually going to come out as like a picture or an image or some
Right,
business
right.
process or the modification to some state or a database or something. It's like nothing like it. It is so far removed. And obviously we need something as an intermediary, and that's the code. That's great, but I don't think you can ever really just have that one for one representation that just has natural understanding side effects. It's always got to be, I'm writing this, and in order to make sense of this, I need to imagine what's going on somewhere else or what effect it's having
Yeah,
somewhere else.
yeah. Well, and our brains haven't evolved to absorb information that way, right?
Right.
Because we do talk in code, because language is a code, right? It's
Right.
a mutually understand code. We're speaking English. We have certain words that have certain meanings, and even when those meanings we get confused, and I've done this to you several times in these conversations. I say, let's define the word, because one of the things I find is, sometimes people will be arguing about a word, or a concept, and you can tell by listening to them that they both believe the exact same thing, but they're using different definitions of a word. But
Yeah.
it has to be somewhat adjacent to our experience, right? And looking at a bunch of squiggles on a page doesn't do that. I think I've always said this. I was joking with a friend of mine, yesterday, came to my game day, like, and he's a great coder. And I'm like, I've always told, for the last decade or two, I've told you, I need you smart people to come up with code where I, as a creator, just go in and say, I have an object. Here's this relationship with this other object. So in language, human language, I say, here's all the relationships. Here's how this works. Here's how this. I don't write any code, and nowadays they call that vibe coding. So we were joking about that. I said, I've been telling you smart people to do this, and now it's happening. And we're not there yet. I know some people can do vibe coding. I can't. But this is the thing to me of, how many layers and moving parts can we strip out of the creative process to let us just be free? And so that, to me, from a vibe coding perspective, if that's the word we want to use for it, to me, I have tons of things I could create. In the time that I've been coding Chaos Empire, if the computer would have done the code, that game would be done, and I'd probably be on my third or fourth game at least. So the freeing ability of that to say, like, I have all this stuff in my brain, I can come up with mechanics very quickly. I can balance them quickly. I can do the world building. That stuff to me is easy. And I say easy, it's work, but at least I understand the process. So this is the beauty from the creative process, and even like we talked about earlier, like, how do you remove these obstacles from your intent? How do we remove these obstacles from the things you want to do and accomplish? And what behaviors you are engaging in that are driving you towards your intent, and what things are you engaging with who are taking you further away or getting you no closer? Or in some cases, since we have limited time, you know, this hour action gets me 50% farther than this other action, and otherwise they're both equal. Well, why don't we take the 50% farther down the path action?
Interesting. Yeah, personally, I don't think that we'll be able to remove engineering from coding to where creative people can just do what you're saying, kind of like talk to it. I don't think vibe coding is that. I think vibe coding is actually, uh, well, Vibe coding is a different beast. I've never been successful at vibe coding anything, and I don't know anyone who has, unless it was something that was already created and it was pretty much just recreating something already created, but something new. Um, I think what AI is going to do, and all it's going to do, is speed up the process and make it like way faster, and also mix that with removing Google search from the programming
Yes,
requirement
yes,
because you can just
yes,
ask AI. But I
yeah,
think you'll always need, and I think it's good that you'll always need the engineering because that's the real power that brings it from just words. You know, code is just words to
right,
something that's functional and as a system and you know, like you can't really imagine vibe coding a robot, right? Because you got to see it like
right.
move, you got to see what how these different things affect each other. State is kind of like that. It's kind of like this living, moving thing, and I think you'll always need to engineer state in a system in a way that I can't imagine a programming language being able to do.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, and I think you're going to have to be able to express the idea. I mean, even say that we got AI to the point, which I think is possible. We got AI to the point where it could write all the code, but you still have to express your ideas clearly to the AI. Otherwise, the AI is just writing a game. And if you want to do that, that's great. But I have no interest in doing that. So to me, it's you have to understand what are the relationships, not only the standard, one to many relationship, but how do these models, I guess, objects, how do they interact with each other? But like, so you get into almost a mechanic design thing. It's not almost, it is a mechanical design thing of, okay, what's the consequences of this? And what's the odds of this? And you have to be able to think that. And once again, you can ask the computer eventually to do all of that stuff. But now you're just saying, hey, make me a 4X game, make me a first person shooter game. And it's coming up with some generic version of that. And maybe through some sort of Darwinistic programming, make 10,000 of those and pick the one that's the edgiest. No, that's too edgy. Start backing it down to something that's workable. But, I think to me, it's I like the creative process. And so, like, if I could have AI write me a great novel, okay, that's great, but I have no interest in doing that. Like, I want to write a novel. I don't care if it's not as good as AI could write, which hopefully isn't true at this point. But so once again, what are we trying to accomplish? What do we want to do? And I think this is, I think understanding, because I run into this a lot in the game dev business, and we've talked about this. Hey, I've got these really cool 10 mechanics in my game. Yeah, but they don't fit together, right? And an AI may not necessarily understand that. In fact, I see that even in my AI coding. It's like, oh, do this. I'm like, that doesn't fit. That doesn't make, so yeah, these are cool 10 mechanics, and the AI went out and grabbed the 10 coolest mechanics for a 4X and threw them into a bundle, but that doesn't fit with what I'm trying to do. It doesn't fit with the spine of my 4X, with the theme of my 4X, what I'm really trying to accomplish. So therefore, I've got to at least understand that, even if the AI is doing all the work, and say, this mechanic doesn't work, and here's why. Get rid of it. This one doesn't. This one needs to be modified. Yeah, let's emphasize these couple mechanics because this is the core of where I'm trying to drive to. But you've got to be able to tell the AI that. So otherwise, it's worthless. And I think for those not using AI other than as a tool, this is where you can up your own game dev experience, right? Understanding how mechanics work, not technically, right? Yeah, 1 + 1 = 2. That's cool, but what's the impact they have on the player experience? And then, okay, you understand that in isolation. Here's we've got this mechanic, and here's the impact. Here's the kind of players that like it. Here's the players that don't like it. Now we've added another one, but that's not just as simple as adding mechanic plus mechanic. There's all kinds of tail off effects on that, secondary tertiary effects of, okay, you've added this with that, and that creates this thing over here, so now we have to address that in some way. And so understanding that makes you able to, or helps you create at least a more holistic game where, once again, that experience is more immersive and just feels more complete and like an actual game, rather than here's a collection of cool mechanics, and yeah, it was all right. I liked all the mechanics and the story was pretty cool, but yeah, I'll never play it again. And I'm off to other things.
yeah. Yeah, I think humans get really caught up in the systems and thinking that the systems is the thing. But systems
Yep.
never exist for themselves, and if they do, it's a really bad system. They always exist
Yes.
for
Yes.
something. Like a legal
Yeah.
system exist, supposed to just allow everyone to live a normal life. It's not supposed to be,
Right. Right.
greater than
Well, I
that.
talk about this with politics, which I think is funny because I even say, like, I hate politics, right? Like most people say, I hate politics, other than politicians who probably say they hate politics. But the fact is, politics is how we govern ourselves in groups. And we are a social species, right? We've achieved our greatness through this comparative advantage. If you're really good at one thing and I'm good at another, and so we both create the thing we're good at. So the fact is, politics is required. We engage in politics all the time. We just don't think of it that way. But at the end of the day, it's not about politics because politics is a necessary component of society. Politics is a necessary component of society because it allows us to govern ourselves, right? How do we interact with each other? And if we had a better way to interact with each other than politics, I'm all ears, but and so I think to your point, that's what happens. If like, oh, there's all these really cool mechanics. Okay, if you're trying to create a list of the coolest mechanics, then you have been successful. Put up a website, say I've collected the 100 coolest mechanics that have existed, which would actually be a pretty cool website. Someone should do that. Um,
Yeah.
but the fact of the matter is, if I'm trying to create a game experience, and then we can even get into a little deeper into that. I'm trying to create what kind of game experience, because who's my target audience member? Who's the like I'm going for this kind of player, and then everything drives towards that because this may be really cool, but it doesn't fit into that game. So yeah, everything serves the purpose of our. We have an overall intent, and if my intent in making any game is to give the player a specific experience. So in a game that it's thoughtful of making you say the mental illness, this is meant to really kind of you know show you that world and help you navigate that world and understand that world, and you're not going to go away from this happy, but that's not my intent, and I'm not trying to ruin your life, but I'm trying to give you this experience of thoughtfulness and understanding, and maybe if you're dealing with that in your life, or you see that in your life, you're a little more compassionate of like, why don't they just be happy? Like, why doesn't this depressed person just be happy? Well, it doesn't work that way. So these are the things of kind of shaping that whole experience. But I think it really strengthens our creative product if we're driving towards that single point, right? That omega point, if you will, of like, this is the experience I want. How do all these mechanics go towards that point? How do they build toward that point? How does all this world building move toward that point? How does my UX UI build? Everything should be building toward that point. And if it's not, get rid of it, change it, do whatever. And if you got 10 things in there and that's too much and they all drive toward that point, okay, which do we keep? 3 things, 4 things, 6 things? What do we keep that keeps our game strong? Because if I wrote a short story, I just wrote a short story for a game jam. It's just over 1,000 words. Um, there were some things that I could add to that, and I'm like, oh, this would be some cool context. This would be some cool things. This would be a cool little setup here. And instead of being 1,000 word story, say it would have been a 1,400 word story. And I thought they were all useful things, and I thought they would help add some, once again, some context to the story. But I thought, does a 40% increase in words help the message? Does it help the underlying message? Does it, what does it do? Does it pay its way for the story? And some might argue it would, right? So if I showed this to a whole bunch of people, some would say it absolutely does. But in my mind, I looked at it and said it doesn't. Therefore, I'm leaving that stuff out. The reader is going to have to do some things in their own brain. We talked about this with my description. Like the novel I'm writing, none of the main characters, I have not physically described any of the main characters, and I may never do so, right? I don't, if there's a need to, I will. So do I need to? Then I will. If I don't need to, I won't. And I know someone would read that and go, I couldn't picture the main characters, so I hated it. Okay, well, I'm sorry that you hate it, and probably don't read any of my stuff because I'm not big on spending a page describing someone's eye color and stuff. So and that's very facetious because most people don't do that, but I don't even feel like saying their eyes are blue because I don't see why it's relevant. And that's the way my brain works. I don't care what color their eyes are. I just care about who they are as a person or an entity and what they're doing in the universe and what the outcomes are.
Yeah, their experience and how they change is definitely the interesting thing. Yeah.
Right. Right.
So what would you say is the point you're driving toward in Chaos Empire? Curious.
Yeah, Chaos Empire is a strategic war game. I mean, I think that's and I have a thought. So it's a strategic war game because in strategy games, and a lot of people screw this up, by the way. But in strategy games, logistics is important, right? Like you may have heard, that tactics win battles and logistics win wars, right? There's a lot of quotes about that, and so I do think it's true. Um, and when you're playing a strategic war game and you're in there controlling every ship you have and just deciding when you're firing the missiles, that's not strategy to me, right? Even as an admiral of that fleet, never mind the ruler of a whole empire. I'm not, Captain Johnson, fire that's ridiculous to me, and you can make a good experience of that. So yeah, the purpose of this thing is to give you that feel of, hey, I'm controlling this empire. I'm trying to beat, and this is PvP. I mean, this is no, environmental. I'm trying to annihilate or at least join with my opponents to be the survivor, whether that's a surviving alliance or the surviving player. But then and so that's the core of it, and then underneath it, I think of it as, and this would only make sense for people who understand war game, well, history as well. It's world. I call it World War I diplomacy with World War II Pacific combat. So that's kind of a feature under that, because in World War I, before it broke out, like, whose side was Italy going to be on? Well, they could be on, right. It was much more fluid than maybe World War II, or like, here's the Germans and the Italians and the Japanese may join. So to me, it's very fluid, and that anyone could join with anyone. There's not these natural alliances of like, hey, Danny and I are natural friends or natural enemies. But then what I like about the World War II Pacific theater of the World War II Pacific theater was about fighting for strong points, islands in the Pacific. So you didn't have ground armies. We're driving forward on multiple axes, and we're trying to take terrain and crossing rivers and mountains. It's literally, here's an island here and here's an island here, and if we bypass these islands, well, our supplies can be cut off. We can get in trouble. So we have to take strong point by strong point. So when I'm making design decisions, it's like, okay, I want this to be a strong point by strong point combat. So therefore, ships can't even collide in space, right? So if you're jumping from one system and I'm jumping from a system and we cross in the middle, there's no collision because there's nothing to fight for in the middle of the space unless we both happen to be there and decide to fight. So, so those are the things that I'm trying to drive to. But once again, it is a war game. So I'm not, the world building that I've done on it is just a basic thing to describe why some of the things happen for people who care. And at the end of the day, I want to sit down. I want to build my empire. I want to build I call them resource points. I want to out resource point you, because if I out resource point you enough, it doesn't matter how good you are at positioning your ships, I'm going to beat you. If you're outnumbered 3-1 in a true war game that's strategic and there's no modifiers, right? The game's over, right? And that's why you don't fight to the end of my game unless you've chosen a game instance where you want to do that. So I want to replicate that. I don't want to ever get into, and I do have, like, I have covert ops where you send individual agents. So once again, we can break these rules a little bit because I like covert operations, and I could say, well, you send a team of people, we can call them what we want, but at the end of the day, you create these key personnel and you send them to do an assassination mission or a create unrest mission on someone else's system, or even a counterintelligence mission or an intelligence mission. So I like that aspect of strategy. So that's in the game, and technically I'm building the agents. I created some spies that I'm sending to places. Is that strategic or not? You could make an argument on the other side of that, but I think it adds. So once again, I think that's a thing that pays its way in it. But you don't control your fleets. You have a 12 ship or 11 ship fleet, which is the max fleet size you can have. It flies into my system. I flow in with 11. We decide that we're going to fight it out. We're finding the results. We're not in there telling them when to retreat or when to press the attack or when to fire or whatever. Everyone's blazing away until the conditions are met where one fleet is heading the other direction or is destroyed.
Interesting. So you just kind of have to plan ahead and make sure that you're the strongest compared to people around you.
When do you want to accept battle? Yeah. And so that becomes, so think about this from a strategic perspective of, it's not like, hey, I think I can beat this guy here. Well, it's not about beating you on that one system. It's about winning the war. So I may beat you there, but if I beat you there and then I lose a system because that fleet was supposed to go reinforce a system that's about to fall, I won a battle, but maybe, lost a piece of the war. So that's the decisions that I want to make is, right, where are your resources best deployed to achieve victory? So for instance, covert missions, key personnel cost money. Okay, so am I spending money on covert, which takes away from fleets or, army divisions? If I don't want to do offensive covert missions, If the enemy's chewing me up with covert, maybe I put a minimum amount of resources to go defensive. And when we first played the game, we had one player who did no offensive missions. He did a minimum and defended his systems with spies, doing counter missions basically. And so that was a cool use of resources. I'm not gonna be the covert person. We had another player who really built tons of covert and was assassinating governors and systems and doing all this stuff. But they felt they had to do that because they were in a more resource poor sector. So once again, you're looking at the terrain that you're in, which is a collection of systems rather than forest and deserts, and saying, based on my position in the map and the systems I see around me, I think I'm not going to beat anyone fleet to fleet. So what I need to do is I'm going to go strong covert and really try to slow my enemy down by gathering where's he building fleets. And we found where he's building some fleets. They're not built yet and they're not defending them for some reason. So we're going to fly in there with our fleet when they're about to get done and blow them up when they can't fight back. So there was a lot of cool interaction. And I think the strength of my game is that it's not that complicated. It's meant to be easily understood by a new player to the game, but it's the way that those components all interact. It's the way that your fleets and your economics and your ground units and your covert, it's the way they interact with each other. And I want to give the players those meaningful choices we talk about, right? Instead of, you just build a bunch of fleets and I think that would be boring as a strategic game. So what are we going to do? How are we going to navigate this based on our resources? Are we going to try to make alliances? Or we're trying to convince all the neutral systems, because say there's 100 and something systems in there, and let's say there's 6 players, just to make up a number. There's 6 players, 100 systems, so there's 94 systems that are neutral. Am I going to just go conquer them? Because that's you can just go in there with military and take them out, but that doesn't make the neutral systems happy, right? There's consequences to that. Am I going to open embassies? So there's diplomacy, which I didn't mention. You open embassies, and then you can give diplomatic aid, which increases their chance. So you're literally send a diplomat. You're trying to convert them to join your system. You can send diplomatic aid, which increases the chances. But then the enemy can be sending in covert. They can set up embassies as well, so you can have competing embassies. Maybe you assassinate their diplomat to slow them down a little bit, and then they're, oh, you want to assassinate my. So this is where all that interplay comes in. And it was a great game. I've only run it once, and so that's anecdotal, right? Like it happened to work out perfectly. So it was 9 players. It ended up with 2 alliances of 4, 1 neutral playing everyone, and the neutral player won, by the way. But how do you set that up when that doesn't happen? How do you set that up when there's 9 players that start and 6 of them join an alliance and 3 of them are not in an alliance, and the 6 people mop up the 3? That's not fun. And I don't think you can completely prevent that, but it's something to be aware of, right? Like let's be aware of the possibilities of this and try to build the rules to kind of help mitigate those circumstances.
Yeah. I'm gonna step away for 1 second. It's raining on our dock couch. If it gets soaked, it'll be moldy. So I will be right back. 1 second. You want to talk to Randy, babe?
Okay, now that Danny's not here, we can plot to take over his channel, everyone. Don't tell him. It's a secret.
Didn't get wet. It's a light rain.
It's just a light rain.
Yeah.
Everything's fine, I believe is the quote.
Yes. I'm fine. It's fine. Everything's fine. So I didn't know you were running the game. Are you going to be doing it again soon, or?
Well, I ran the Empire, Chaos Empire. I ran many years ago, so it was the original version of it.
Oh,
And then when
this was like
the
that.
game went for.
I didn't realize this. You had a written version, like a tabletop version.
Well, the original game was done. It was kind of a silly situation. I wanted to run this game forever. I had some friends who ran them. Basically, back in the day, before we even could have done this on computer, even before computers, probably for some of them. But it was kind of basically a play by email or play by mail. It wasn't even play by email. I always wanted to do
Oh,
it, and so
okay.
yeah. So at one point, I said, no one's ever been able to do this. Like they've done it and it goes a turn or two and then it blows up and it doesn't go on. So I'm going to do it. So I said, I've got to put it in some kind of database. Like I'm not going to hand calculate everything. So I'll put it in some kind of database. And I
Oh, the
had
access
Microsoft
database.
Office.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I put it in Access. I wrote the rules in it was probably 30 days. So this is when you've done this enough, right? Like I wrote the whole rule set, and once again, it's not complicated. 30 days, had to hardly make any changes once we ran it, right? I mean, it just everything kind of clicked together. Um, and I knew like I don't have any of this coded, but they're starting on one system. So I can be hand calculating things and send out the results. And then I just as the game went on, I just started right doing the coding. And they never did the entry. So I didn't have to do data validation, which is a lot of the pain, right? Like I could use the human brain to go, okay, you can't do that. Like tell the player, you know. So they filled out basically a form, sent it to me, I inputted it, then I pushed the button and all the results did went to a report, and then I sent them the report. And that went for 5 years. It was so much fun. And there was a lot of role playing, and it wasn't the purpose of the game because I set up the Nebula News Network and I had a propaganda section. So I'd give news around the nebula, and it was a place to give people public information that they should know, right? So a fun way to do it rather than saying here's what your stuff gives you. But then there was the great Ryan Cheese Monkey War. I mean, there was just all kinds of great propaganda stuff going on, and so I want to replicate that. I don't think I can do the exact same thing with strangers that we had with a group of friends, but yeah, it ran for 5 years, and when it shut down, my friends were like, "Oh, we want to keep like." I'm gonna have to code it. I'm gonna have to code it so that I don't touch it. And so, and I was super busy doing work and all those other things. And I said, yeah, someday I'll get back to it. And so now I'm back to it. And so the goal is to set it up so that, and we all know how we don't have to touch it as the devs, but at least I don't have to go in there and process every turn, and people can just set up an instance and play. And you can set up multiple instances and play. And, so I'm looking forward to playing myself because I didn't get to play the first time, so I want to be able to play my own game at some point.
So I got your histories confused here. So you had kind of like a D&D alternative separate from Chaos
And
Empire. So you had
yes,
like
yeah,
a
Lords of
tabletop.
Chaos.
Lords of Chaos is what you
Yeah,
do now still.
yeah. Lords of Chaos is a game that I created in college with some friends. So we just started taking all the games. Yeah, it was originally called like Chivalrous, Storm Rune, Dragon. We took Dungeons and Dragons and Chivalry and Sorcery and just like these games all, sorry for you, love them, suck in certain ways. Let's create. So this I think is the thing for game creators. I'm going to create the game that I want to play, and so started creating the game I wanted to play, and eventually it evolved into Lords of Chaos, right? Because all the old rules eventually just went away, and it became all nothing's truly original, but original content. And I've been running that game since college. Um, in the same universe, if you will. I run once again first Sunday of every month. I run a game. There's some other games I run, occasionally. And I have 10 players right now, and 5 of them have been playing since college. So, and I am old, so that was 40 years ago. So I have 5 players who have played this game for 40 years, and are still coming back for some reason. So yeah, so my 2 things is Lords of Chaos is actually published. I kickstarted it and published it on Drive-Thru RPG. And then I have this Chaos Empire, which someday before Heat Death of the Universe, I hope to have done and publicly available. So
Nice. So is Chaos Empire, I guess I should say, could I jump in with like 5 friends and have like an instance? Is that what you're saying? With just my 5
absolutely.
friends?
Yeah.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, so it's set up. There's going to be maps. Like I have a test map now, right? But the intent is to have a bunch of different kinds of maps, and you could have a map that had tons of systems in it, right, or fewer systems. You could have here's a 2-player map. I've done like the map I have right now is a mirrored map. So instead of random systems, the original game I did everything randomly, but there's mirrored maps. So everyone's equal, right? Like I said, it's a 2-person mirrored map. You both have the same type A system with the same number of resources and population, and all the systems around you, are a mirror. But that's it. Hey, I want to play a 4-player. So in theory, you would say I'm setting up. You would have the friends to do it, or you could say I'm setting up a 4-player game. Come join me. Here's the map. Here's what we're doing. We're fighting to the death, or we're fighting to the vote. Nebula vote, and set the parameters of the game, and then people join, and then you kick off the game, and then you go till someone wins, and then you can
Nice.
go again. So
Yeah, that sounds fun. Definitely want to try that. And you're building it in PHP with MySQL?
Yeah, so Laravel framework, which is a PHP framework, and then MySQL database. I'm trying to use as few tools as possible because I'm not knowledgeable. So the more tools, the more overhead you have as far as trying to keep up with all the updates and things. So
That's
um,
smart.
it's
Yeah.
it's really not that complicated. I think someone who's really good at it could probably make the game in 6 months, or less if they really could focus on it. Not necessarily 100% tweaked, but I'll get there eventually. Get a piece done at a time, and it's been a good experience of just kind of the challenge of going through and figuring out how to get it coded, and even in the coding, I'm looking at things that we did before, and I like the way it worked before, but it's like okay, let's examine that and let's see is there a better way we can do it. So I've already changed a couple things of saying hey this would be cool if we could do that. So that I'm going in there and having to. In fact, I even had to go in and like I need to change how this rule works. So go in and change some rules a little bit, and um, but it's been a fun process and it keeps me engaged, right? I like the once again the coding part has its fun and non-fun, but I like really thinking about the mechanics and really implementing them and like okay, how is this going to work, with all the others if I tweak it this way? So I'm looking forward to the end result and looking forward, like I said, looking forward to playing some games of it and seeing how it turns out.
Yeah. I just have one more question. I could keep on asking questions forever, but um, uh, have you noticed that you've had to make the game worse or make the game, or has there been opportunities to make the game better in converting it to uh, online game?
Yeah, I think the opportunities are to make it better. I think there's concerns that I have that I didn't have in the original game, but those are I'd call those social concerns rather than mechanical concerns. So that's what I'm looking at is like, okay, what would be a way to make this more cool within our core drive, right? Within our core intent of what we're trying to do. So because especially since I'm not having to enter anything, right? So this is where the computers help us of like, look, I don't have to deal with any of this. So I can make this. Who cares if this doesn't happen? But like if this is goes from a 10 line function to 1,000 line function, but it's cooler, who cares, right? And I'm not gonna have performance issues, right? Because well, there's perform it doesn't matter. So if I was hand calculating that, obviously to calculate 10 lines versus 1,000, you're just not going to even go there. So I use that computer as a freeing thing to say, okay, like I've got the computer that can just offload all of this stuff. So to me, it's about setting up the best scenario for the player experience and what does that look like. And so once again, my concerns are around, okay, you start with 9 players and 6 of them form an alliance. The 3 players are probably in trouble, and they don't have to be. Once again, there was 2 4-player alliances, and one person beat the other two. But I want to take that experience and do we encourage? And I don't. This is something I don't know because I didn't have to deal with this the first time. Do we, as alliances grow, if you go past 4 alliances in a 9-player game, is there friction we put in there for that alliance? So do we do something to discourage that? And part of that will just be experience. And so I have an experience of one game played over 5 years. It tested the mechanics, it tested an optimal scenario because it worked out optimally. But the only way to know otherwise is to kind of think through it as much as you can, ask those questions we've talked about, and then get it out in beta and have people start doing it and see what games people play. I have some min maxers, and I saw them do some ship builds, for instance. I'm like, oh, like, did I break a rule here? Because if you want a Uber ship, like in the World War II Pacific, the aircraft carriers were the supreme weapon, right? And so you could do that deliberately as a designer. I want there to be, hey, the dreadnought is the supreme weapon, and when a dreadnought shows up, you're in trouble. I didn't want that. I want there to be balance, balance. So when people were building, dreadnoughts, which are the biggest ships, but loading them with all missiles or something, and I'm like, oh, did I break something here? And then you go in and test it and go, no, it's not. It's really good at this, but it's really horrible at this. So you just don't know till you get out there and start, especially your min maxers, those people who are really good about, they're going to find that edge and they're going to go in there and, once again, trust your players. There's ones that won't care, they'll play it casually, but there's ones that are going to be in there, they're going to test every crevice and corner and see, like, is there an edge I can get? And then you examine that and say, is that an acceptable edge, right? Or is that a non-acceptable edge? That breaks the game, it breaks the experience. So I'm gonna, hey, sorry, Danny, I know you figured out how to do this, Uber ship, but we're stripping the Uber ship away.
Yeah, I had a ton of those in my game, and people found them very quickly.
Yes. Yeah, they're very
All
good
right.
at it. So
Well, thank you so much, Randy Hayes. This was amazing. Can't wait for round 5. So.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. So
We'll
uh,
save some of this for
yeah,
them.
it's fun. It's a fun chat and forces what I like these things because it forces me to think about, right, to put my thoughts into words that hopefully are understandable to people. And there's a
Definitely.
benefit from that. So I enjoy them as
That's
well.
all. Yeah, yeah. You have a ton of experience, and I find it to be extremely valuable. So thank you very much.
Awesome. I appreciate it.
All right. See you later.